I'm Dr. Yasir Masood. Welcome to the first episode of Diplomatic Dispatch. We are diving into the U.S.-China story.
That the United States and China were allies during World War II. Some sort of, if I may use the term, dramatic shift.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm Dr. Yasir Masood, and I'm super thrilled to be joined by Dr. David Oualaalou, a Texas-based renowned geopolitical analyst, author, and public speaker with sharp insights and bold takes. Today, we are diving into the U.S.-China story from their World War II alliance to today's competition and cooperation in trade, AI, and global influence. We'll also unpack the Taiwan question, especially timely as China marks 80 years since its victory over Japanese aggression. If you want nuance, not noise, stick with us. This discussion will certainly change how you see headlines. Welcome, Dr. Oualaalou. So straight away, I'll begin with the question, as you have a lot of expertise on U.S.-China and other relations as well. So the question is more related to U.S.-China relationship. The U.S. and China once stood together against fascism in World War II. How can that spirit of cooperation inspire new ways to strengthen overall economic and diplomatic ties today?
First of all, Yasir, it is a great pleasure to be invited to your new podcast, and I am even more honored that I've been chosen to be the first one to conduct this conversation with you. So it is an honor and pleasure, and I look to many, many more conversations with you. It is accurate that the United States and China were allies during World War II because they were fighting a common enemy, fascism at that time, especially as it was known as the axis of power at that time. And we're talking particularly about Japan. However, at that time, things changed. And the post-war period saw some sort of, if I may use the term, dramatic shift in this relationship. And we are witnessing it right now on a host of levels. Of course, the Korean War transformed this dynamics as well. And that's where, in my opinion, this ushered in some sort of a decade or an era of an antagonism on part of the United States towards China. And that's, to me, is very, very, very problematic.
Very well explained in such a detailed manner. And this puts me to think, how do you see the technology or the scientific research looking at both collaborating in ways that can encourage innovation while responsibly addressing the prevailing or consistent ongoing security and strategic concerns?
Well, that's an interesting point, Yasir, and because sort of you hit the nail on the head. Why am I saying this? Is because the technological sector is what's going to also really define the new trajectory of the global order. I am referring to the idea of how, for example, the Chinese economy is going to be dependent also on technology. That's going to play a major role into moving the country forward, something we don't have here in the United States. When you look at, for example, brain power, look how many students China graduates every year in STEM domain, science, math, technology, and engineering, in comparison to what we graduate here in the U.S. Take your audience, rather, to 2007. I was still in Washington, D.C. at that time. And the argument we were having inside quietly at that time had to do with the ISS, the International Space Station. Why is this important? It's because some members inside Congress were pushing against allowing the scientists, the astronauts, and at that time, Barack Obama went ahead and sent a letter to Congress saying that you need to create a law that will ban the presence of the Chinese scientists on the ISS. Well, guess what China ended up doing? China has developed even far greater aspects of this technology. Particularly, there is one domain that I foresee a major competition is going to be in the artificial intelligence. But I do believe, knowing what I know and the readings that have been conducted, China will have an edge over the United States. And this is where I believe it's going to be one of the really key areas where that cooperation is going to have to be forged one way or another. You look at now the AI, take DeepSeek versus OpenAI. No comparison whatsoever. Look at the cost. How much does it cost to establish DeepSeek versus Donald Trump's calling for a $500 billion? For what? It cost $5 million to develop DeepSeek. It's just my point here for your audience to understand is that we talk too much. I couldn't even believe, Yasser, I got on a high-speed train in China. We don't have one here. We call ourselves the richest nation on earth. It takes me about 5 hours to get from my town to the next town.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is where I see this development. And what China is doing is with these technological developments is serving its population. The development of China's technology, and we are looking at it also in the EV sector, the cost of vehicles that is way, way different from what it is here in the U.S. And the quality of the product in itself are at affordable cost to consumers. And that's one of the reasons why we are not allowing Chinese EVs, because if Chinese EVs comes over here, most Americans will buy the Chinese vehicles. My point in all this is that in the technological sector, just to go back to your question, Yasser, is that this technological domain, it is my belief, it's going to fuel more tensions between the United States and China. Why? It's because we're going to have to figure out a way, whatever it takes to slow down China's progress, which we can't. It will be better for the United States if it cooperates with China instead of antagonizing the Chinese, because that policy is not going to work.
The way you have explained, it's very incisive and so much learning for me as well personally. The last question is that how do you see this truce between United States and China lasting for a long time, or do you think it would be a temporary kind of trade truce and then the tensions can come again? What's your take on these?
Well, for the first part of your question, Yasser, the idea is that there is no doubt about it. Why? It's because the establishment in Washington is not willing to cooperate. Some voices inside Washington do not want that. However, the tensions will not be directly with China, like face-to-face per se. It's going to be through other elements, countries, allies, vassals, whatever term you want to use in the region. And this pertains to the bigger picture, and that bigger picture has to do with the United States losing its influence in the Indian Pacific realm to China. And that's why we wanted to keep the narrative regarding Taiwan alive. Otherwise, this issue of Taiwan, it's going to be because we're the one who are providing the script for the Taiwanese politicians. So why is this? Because one thing that I need your audience to know, as one who works inside Washington, the president of the United States has no power and has no say into what's going on. It is dictated military-industrial complex. The United States has asked Taiwan to buy about 49% of stakes in Intel, the company that exists here in the United States. Makes you just wonder, why will we ask Taiwan for that? Only way this is going to change if the Taiwanese politicians, like I always call it, the governor of Taiwan, is not a president, in my opinion, because it's not a sovereign state. And this is what I believe the politicians in Taiwan needs to do to resolve this once for all. As we speak on some sort of a bill for the sale of more weapons to Taiwan. Why? It's because our policy has no merit whatsoever. We threaten countries, we weaponize the dollar, we getting into even these tariffs issues with China and so forth. It was ill-conceived. China has no interest in dominating the world. What for? And this is, again, where the mainstream media here is misleading the masses, because people only believe what they hear. Because we, majority of us Americans, are poor readers of history. I had a chance to go to Taiwan last year. I wanted to see with my own eyes, so this way nobody can tell me or the media will suggest to me what I was on the ground. and I asked people about, for example, do you understand what's going on regarding the tensions between China and the United States over Taiwan? And majority of the people I asked, sorry to say, had no clue what's going on. And that gives me right there the idea that masses in Taiwan have been fed certain narratives by their local governments. I don't call it state because I don't believe in Taiwan as a sovereign state. There is no doubt about this. Even for us, the Americans, we've signed the 3 communiques with the Chinese back then, recognizing that China is the overall owner of Taiwan. In other words, Taiwan is part of China. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves not honoring that commitment. But why national security matters is because you're going to be looking now at the presence of the U.S. in that part of the world. I'm referring to the South China Sea. So it won't be to our interests to engage with China militarily because China has the capability of reaching the mainland even through the Pacific with its advanced missile systems. And it's something we can afford. And this is why I don't lean towards this military conflict is going to happen. What we're going to be creating is conflicts after conflict, which has been the policy since the early 50s. And the last point I want to mention has to do with geopolitics. Why is this important for your audience to know? It is because you're looking at 2 versions of the future of the world. You're looking at a version of the United States, which we all know what it means, hegemonic dominance, the weaponization of the dollar, just taking resources from other countries. Then you have the other versions of the Chinese world vision, which one that calls for cooperation, the ones that calls for the prosperity, economic prosperity, the one that calls for economic developments like infrastructure and so forth. And this is where you're going to see now these challenges that's moving forward as to what lies ahead. What kind of a system is going to replace? Because make no mistake about it, the era of the U.S. dominance has come to an end. It's not coming to an end, has already come to an end because the world has shifted from a unipolar to a multipolar. The key question, Yasir, we need to ask is what role and what kind of a role China is going to play into the new order, because China will have to play a role one way or another because there will be no other power you can think of that could lead to that.
So that was Dr. David Oualaalou, a bold and brilliant voice on geopolitics. 3 key takeaways from my first episode of Diplomatic Dispatch. First, the US-China competition and cooperation run deep. Tariffs and headlines only scratch the surface. Second, technology and research will shape who leads the future. And third, a world with multiple powers is here. If this episode sharpened your thinking, like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment. Which insight surprised you most? Please feel free to suggest a guest you would like me to invite next. I'm Dr. Yasir Masood. Thanks for joining Diplomatic Dispatch. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning. Goodbye.